East Village is a neighborhood in the borough of Manhattan in New York City, bordered to the west by Greenwich Village, to the north by Gramercy Park and Stuyvesant Town, to the south by the Lower East Side, and to the east by the East River. Generally, although definitions vary on the neighborhood's exact street boundaries, East Village is considered to be the area east of 3rd Avenue and the Bowery to the East River, between 14th Street and Houston Street. The area was once generally considered to be part of the Lower East Side, but began to develop its own identity and culture in the late 1960s, when many artists, musicians, students and hippies began to move into the area, attracted by cheap rents and the base of Beatniks who had lived there since the 1950s. The neighborhood has become a center of the counterculture in New York, and is known as the birthplace and historical home of many artistic movements, including punk rock and the Nuyorican literary movement. It has also been the site of protests and riots. East Village is still known for its diverse community, vibrant nightlife and artistic sensibility, although in recent decades it has been argued that gentrification has changed the character of the neighborhood. History, background. The area that is today known as the East Village was originally a farm owned by Dutch Governor-General Wouter van Twiller. Peter Stuyvesant received the deed to this farm in 1651, and his family held onto the land for over 7 generations, until a descendant began selling off parcels of the property in the early 19th century. Wealthy townhouses dotted the dirt roads for a few decades until the Great Irish and German immigration of the 1840s and 1850s. Speculative landowners began building multi-unit dwellings on lots meant for single-family homes, and began renting out rooms and apartments to the growing working class, including many immigrants from Germany. From roughly the 1850s to first decade of the 20th century, the neighborhood has the third largest urban population of Germans outside of Vienna and Berlin, known as Kleindeutschland. It was America's first foreign-language neighborhood. Hundreds of political, social, sports and recreational clubs were set up during this period, and some of these buildings still exist. However, the vitality of the community was sapped by the General Slocum disaster on June 15, 1904, in which over 1,000 German Americans died. Later waves of immigration also brought many Poles and, especially, Ukrainians to the area, creating an Ukrainian enclave in the city. Since the 1890s there has been a large concentration roughly from 10th Street to 5th Street, between 3rd Avenue and Avenue Way. The post-World War II diaspora, consisting primarily of Western Ukrainian intelligentsia, also settled down in the area. Several churches, including St. George's Catholic Church, Ukrainian restaurants and butcher shops, the Ukrainian Museum, the Shevchenko Scientific Society, and the Ukrainian Cultural Center are evidence of the impact of this culture on the area. The area originally ended at the East River, to the east of where Avenue D is now located, until landfill including World War II debris and rubble shipped from London was used to extend the shoreline outward to provide foundation for the Franklin D. Roosevelt Drive. New neighborhood. Until the mid-1960s, the area was simply the northern part of the Lower East Side, with a similar culture of immigrant, working-class life. In the 1950s, the migration of Beatniks into the neighborhood later attracted hippies, musicians and artists well into the 1960s. The area was dubbed the East Village, to dissociate it from the image of slums evoked by the Lower East Side. According to the New York Times, a 1964 guide called Earl Wilson's New York wrote that artists, poets and promoters of coffeehouses from Greenwich Village are trying to remelt the neighborhood under the high-sounding name of East Village. Newcomers and real estate brokers popularized the new name, and the term was adopted by the popular media by the mid-1960s. In 1966 a weekly newspaper, the East Village Other, appeared and the New York Times declared that the neighborhood had come to be known as the East Village in the June 5, 1967 edition. Arts scenes, music scene. In 1966, Andy Warhol promoted a series of multimedia shows, entitled The Exploding Plastic Inevitable, and featuring the music of the Velvet Underground, in a Polish ballroom on St. Mark's Place. On June 27, 1967, the Electric Circus opened in the same space with a benefit for the Children's Recreation Foundation whose chairman was Bobby Kennedy. The Grateful Dead, the Chambers Brothers, Sly and the Family Stone and the Allman Brothers were among the many rock bands that performed there before it closed in 1971. On March 8, 1968, Bill Graham opened the Fillmore East in what had been a Yiddish theater on 2nd Avenue at East 6th Street in the Yiddish Theater District. The venue quickly became known as the Church of Rock and Roll, with 2 show concerts several nights a week. While booking many of the same bands that had played the Electric Circus, Graham particularly used the venue and its West Coast counterpart to establish in the U.S. British bands such as The Who, Pink Floyd, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Cream and Led Zeppelin. The Fillmore East closed in 1971. CBGB, the nightclub considered by some to be the birthplace of punk music, was located in the neighborhood, as was the early punk stand by A7. No Wave and New York hardcore also emerged in the area's clubs. Among the many important bands and singers who got their start at these clubs and other venues in downtown Manhattan were Patti Smith, Arto Lindsay, The Ramones, Blondie, Madonna, Talking Heads, Television, The Plasmatics, Glenn Danzig, Sonic Youth, The Beastie Boys, Anthrax, and The Strokes. Some icons of the punk scene remained in the neighborhood as it changed. Richard Hull lives in the same apartment he has lived in since the 1970s, and Handsome Dick Manitoba of the Dictators owns Manitoba's Bar on Avenue B. Art scene. Over the last 100 years, the East Village and the Lower East Side have contributed significantly to American arts and culture in New York. The neighborhood has been the birthplace of cultural icons and movements from the American Gangster to the Warhol superstars, folk music to punk rock, anti-folk to hip-hop, advanced education to organized activism, experimental theater to the Beat Generation and the community of experimental musicians, composers and improvisers now loosely known as the downtown scene. Club 57, on St. Mark's Place, was an important incubator for performance art and visual art in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Followed by Now Gallery, 8BC and ABC No Rio. During the 1980s, the East Village Art Gallery scene helped to galvanize a new postmodern art in America. Showing such artists as Key Smith, Peter Halley, Keith Haring, Kenny Scharf, Stephen Lack, Greer Langton, Joseph Neechvattel, Jim Radakovich, Nan Goldin, Jean-Michel Basquiat, David Wajarawicz, James Romberger, Jeff Koons, Kevin Lame, and Dave Vulcan. The East Village, specifically the area known as Alphabet City, is also the setting for Jonathan Larson's musical Rent, which captures the neighborhood in the early 1990s. It opened at the New York Theater Workshop in February 1996. Rent describes a city devastated by the AIDS epidemic, drugs and high crime, and follows several characters in their efforts to make livings as artists. Decline. The East Village's performance and arts scene has declined since its height in the 1970s and 1980s. One club that tried to resurrect the neighborhood's past artistic prominence was Mopatkin's House of Satisfaction, part owned by Jimmy Fallon of Saturday Night Live. The venue's past performers include figures such as Murray Hill, Rob Corddry, Rachel Dratch, Amy Puer, Moby, and Debbie Harry. It closed its doors in 2007. A study done by Fordham University notes the decline of the East Village performance and art scene, and how the young, liberal culture that once found its place on the Manhattan side of the East River has shifted in part to new neighborhoods like Williamsburg and Brooklyn. Rapture Cafe also shut down in April 2008, and the neighborhood lost an important performance space and gathering ground for the gay community. There are still some performance spaces, such as Sidewalk Cafe on Avenue A, where downtown acts find space to exhibit their talent, and the poetry club's Bowery Poetry Club and Nuyorican Poets Cafe are copyright. From 2004 until 2009, the art gallery American Painting, located on East 6th Street, between 2nd and 3rd Avenues, exhibited the works of several New York and American artists, namely, Andre Kushner, Michelle Martin Taylor, Carol Spills, Barbara Nuss, Joachim Marx, Stevens J. Carter and Michael Francis. One of their last exhibits, East Village Afternoon, depicted local interiors, exteriors, and scenes of the changing neighborhood. Gentrification and preservation. Gentrification and effects. As has often been the pattern in Manhattan, a neighborhood that is discovered by artists and bohemians and then becomes hip, will often begin to attract more affluent residents, which drives up the price of housing, and begins to drive out the residents who turned over the neighborhood. This is one theory of gentrification, and some argue that it has also occurred in the New York City neighborhoods Soho and Tribeca in Manhattan, as well as Williamsburg in Brooklyn. Over the course of time, this demographic shift begins to change the essential character of the neighborhood. It becomes safer, more comfortable, less tolerant of noise, and less edgy. Some gentrification opponents believe this process causes the neighborhood to lose its unique identity for the sake of money. For example, in April 2009, a 5-foot-tall big-screen TV was left out with the garbage on 9th Street near Tompkins Square Park, which would have been unimaginable 10 years prior. The term gentrification is often used to reflect this, and the gentrification of the neighborhood has resulted in people being pushed out and some buildings in the area being torn down and replaced by newer buildings. The actor David Schwimmer bought an 1852 townhouse on East 6th Street in 2010, got several notices of its possible landmark status the next year, but had the building completely torn down and rebuilt anyway, much to the ire of his neighbors. Rezoning. In 2008 a rezoning modified much of the zoning in East Village. The area affected by the rezoning roughly bounded by East 13th Street on the north, 3rd Avenue on the west, Delancey Street on the south, and Avenue D on the east. It was the first time that a rezoning had occurred in the area since 1961. The rezoning was done in response to concerns about the character and scale of some of the new buildings in the neighborhood. The previous zoning limited the area of floor space that a building could have, but there were no limits on building heights or on setbacks from the street. The new zoning established height limits for new development throughout the affected area, decreased allowable density in much of the mid-block residential areas but increased it along wider thoroughfares, capped air rights transfers, eliminated the current zoning bonus for dorms and hotels, and created incentives for the creation and retention of affordable housing. The city first released a draft rezoning in July of 2006, after hearing input from neighborhood advocates including the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation, Community Board 3, the East Village Community Coalition, and City Council member Rosie Mendez. Concerned that the 3rd Avenue corridor, where much of the most out-of-scale development was occurring, was left out of that draft, advocates continued to push for an expansion of the rezoning, eventually securing the 3rd/4th Avenue corridor down zoning in 2010. The GVSHP report OE keeping in character summed up the changes this way. OE under the new zoning, development tends to be shorter and much more similar in height to surrounding buildings, must maintain the all-important street wall, is usually less bulky than could have been built under the old zoning, and is more likely to be for residential use than a hotel or dormitory. In fact, in many cases the new zoning makes it more desirable to retain existing buildings rather than tear them down and replace them as the old zoning had encouraged. The rezoning does contain some zoning bulk bonuses for the creation or retention of affordable housing. But even in these cases the new developments are nevertheless required to maintain the same height limits as all other new developments in their zoning district. The rezoning process and hearings were marked by protests and accusations of promoting gentrification and increased property values over the Lower East Side's historic status as a home to New York's low-income immigrant communities and their needs for affordable housing. Residents of Chinatown, which is adjacent to the southern boundary of the rezoning area, were worried that by blocking the construction of tall, slender towers in the East Village, developers wishing to build in that style would turn their sights to Chinatown. Most of Chinatown is zoned as commercial districts, which are relatively lax in terms of building character and land use regulations. This led the community boards in the area to create the Chinatown Working Group in order to address the concerns of residents and to work to preserve Chinatown's particular character, employment opportunities, and affordable housing. Landmark efforts and successes. local community groups actively are working to gain individual and district landmark designations for the East Village to preserve and protect the architectural and cultural identity of the neighborhood. One such group is the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. It has undertaken a complete survey of the East Village, documenting the history of every single building in the area. In the spring of 2011, the Landmarks Preservation Commission proposed two East Village historic districts, one small district covering the block of East 10th Street known as Tompkins Square North, and one larger district focused around Lower 2nd Avenue that would encompass 15 blocks and 330 buildings. The original proposal for the larger district excluded buildings such as the Pyramid Club and the Russian Orthodox Cathedral on East 2nd Street. As a result of the efforts made by local community groups such as GVSHP, the Lower East Side Preservation Initiative, East Village Community Coalition, and Historic Districts Council, however, the proposed district now includes these buildings. In January 2012, the East 10th Street Historic District was designated by the LPC. Minutes before the designation, an out-of-scale rooftop addition on one of the included buildings was approved by the Department of Buildings. In October 2012, the East Village Lower East Side Historic District, the larger district, was also designated by the LPC. Preservation and community groups of the East Village seek to have other buildings landmarked, including parts of St. Mark's Place, the blocks to the north, and more of the streets bordering Tompkins Square Park. Other successful efforts to retain the neighborhood unregistered trademark low-rise character by controlling development include the East Village downzoning of 2008 and the 3rd/4th Avenue corridor downzoning, effective in 2010. GVSHP and allied groups have rallied to get some notable buildings designated as individual landmarks, while other structures have been demolished over community objections. Individual landmarks include Webster Hall, a Romanesque revival concert hall and nightclub designed in 1886 with an A-OE extraordinary cultural history according to GVSHP A unregistered trademark S 2007 request for evaluation for the building, A-OE over the last 120 years. The space has hosted everything from debutante balls and society dinners to wrestling matches, political rallies, union meetings, and bohemian costume dances. Less than 1 year later, in 2007, the building was designated an individual landmark. A year earlier, the LPC designated PS 64, a French Renaissance Revival public school built in 1904 June by architect and school superintendent C.B.J. Snyder. Supporters hoped the 2006 vote would serve the practical purpose of ending the owner unregistered trademark S removal of architectural details. It was but one chapter in a heated, ongoing controversy over the building, which had been used as the Cheras El Borgio Community Center until New York City sold it to developer Greg Singer. The year 2006 also saw GVSHP call for the Landmarks Preservation Commission to prevent the demolition of the former Van Tassel and Kearney Horse Auction Mart, a building described as both stately and humble, built for horse trade but eventually used as a factory for OE Rosie the Riveter type women working during WWII, then a studio of the major abstract expressionist Frank Stella. The commission did so by calendaring the building, and designated it a New York City landmark as 2012. Other individual landmarks in the neighborhood include the former Yiddish Art Theater, now in use as a movie theater, which also is an interior landmark, designated in 1993. The Stuyvesant Polyclinic, built in 1884 and designated in 1976. The Children unregistered trademark S. AIDS Society unregistered trademark S. Elizabeth Home for Girls, designated in 2008. And the First Houses, the County unregistered trademark S. First Public Housing Development, built in 1935, designated in 1974, and still used as low-income housing today. Landmark effort failures. Landmark efforts have included a number of losses as well. Despite the request of GVSHP and allied groups in 2012 for landmarking of Mary Help of Christians School, Church and Rectory, with parts dating to 1850 and designed by Nicholas Serracino, by July 2013 demolition had begun. A new development including residences and ground-floor retail is slated to fill the site. In 2011, an early 19th-century federal house at 35 Cooper Square one of the oldest on the Bowery and in the East Village was demolished to make way for a college dorm, over requests of community groups and elected officials. The Landmarks Preservation Commission acts on no particular schedule, leaving some OE calendared requests for designation open indefinitely, such as the 1886 Tifereth Israel Synagogue. Sometimes it simply declines requests for consideration, as it did regarding an unusually intact Italianate tenement at 143 East 13th Street. Structures: New York University. Along with gentrification, the East Village has seen an increase in the number of buildings owned and maintained by New York University, particularly dormitories for undergraduate students, and this influx has given rise to conflict between the community and the university. St. Anne's Church, a rusticated stone structure with a Romanesque revival tower on East 12th Street that dated to 1847, was sold to NYU to make way for a 26-story, 700-bed dormitory. After community protest, the university promised to protect and maintain the church's original facade. And so it did, literally, by having the facade stand alone in front of the building, now the tallest structure in the area. According to many residents, NYU's alteration and demolition of historic buildings, such as the Peter Cooper Post Office, is spoiling the physical and socio-economic landscape that makes this neighborhood so interesting and attractive. NYU has often been at odds with residents of both the East and West Villages due to its expansive development plans. Urban preservationist Jane Jacobs battled the school in the 1960s. She spoke of how universities and hospitals often had a special kind of hubris reflected in the fact that they often thought it was okay to destroy a neighborhood to suit their needs, said Andrew Berman of the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. Cooper Union, the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art, founded in 1859 by entrepreneur and philanthropist Peter Cooper and located on Cooper Square, is one of the most selective colleges in the world, with tuition-free programs in engineering, art and architecture. Its Great Hall is famous as a platform for historic speeches, notably Abraham Lincoln's Cooper Union speech, and its new academic building is the first in New York City to achieve LEED Platinum status. Neighborhoods. The East Village contains several smaller vibrant communities, each with its own character. Alphabet City. Alphabet City, comprising nearly two-thirds of the East Village, was once the archetype of a dangerous New York City neighborhood. Its turnaround was cause for the New York Times to observe in 2005 that Alphabet City went from a drug-infested no-man's land to the epicenter of downtown cool. Its name comes from avenues A, B, C, and D, the only avenues in Manhattan to have single-letter names. It is bordered by Houston Street to the south and 14th Street to the north. Landmarks within Alphabet City include Tompkins Square Park and the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. This part of the neighborhood has long been an ethnic enclave for Manhattan's German, Polish, Hispanic, and Jewish populations. Crime went up in the area in the late 20th century but then declined in the 21st century, as the area became gentrified. Loisaida is a term derived from the Latino, and especially Nuyorican, pronunciation of Lower East Side. The term was originally coined by poet-activist, Bitman Bimbo Rivas in his 1974 poem Loisaida. Loisaida Avenue is now an alternative name for Avenue C in the Alphabet City neighborhood of New York City, whose population has largely been Hispanic since the late 1960s. During the 1980s many of the old, vacant, tenement buildings in this area became inhabited by squatters. In Alphabet City, 8th Street becomes St. Mark's Place east of 3rd Avenue. It once had the cachet of Sutton Place, and was known as a secluded rich enclave in Manhattan, but by the 1850s had become a place for boarding houses and a German immigrant community. It is named after St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, which was built on Stuyvesant Street but is now on 10th Street. St. Mark's Place once began at the intersection of the Bowery and Stuyvesant Street, but today the street runs from 3rd Avenue to Avenue A. Japanese street culture and a Japanese expatriate scene forms in the noodle shops and bars that line the street, also home to an aged punk culture and CBGB's new store. It is home to one of the only automats in New York City. St. Mark's Place is along the Mosaic Trail, a trail of 80 mosaic-encrusted lampposts that runs from Broadway down 8th Street to Avenue A, to 4th Street and then back to 8th Street. The project was undertaken by East Village public artist Jim Power, known as the Mosaic Man. Bowery. The Bowery, former home to the punk rock nightclub CBGB that closed in 2006, was once known for its many homeless shelters, drug rehabilitation centers and bars. The phrase "on the Bowery," which has since fallen into disuse, was a generic way to say one was down and out. The Bowery unregistered trademark RY, the Bowery unregistered trademark RY. They say such things, and they do strange things, on the Bowery unregistered trademark RY. Today, the Bowery has become a boulevard of new luxury condominiums. It is the location of the Bowery Poetry Club, contributing to the neighborhood's reputation as a place for artistic pursuit. Artists Amiri Baraka and Taylor Mead held regular readings and performances in the space. Redevelopment of the avenue from flophouses to luxury condominiums has met resistance from long-term residents, who agree the neighborhood has improved but its unique, gritty character is disappearing. Parks and gardens. Tompkins Square Park. Tompkins Square Park is a 10.5 acres public park in the Alphabet City section of the East Village neighborhood in the borough of Manhattan in New York City. Square in shape, it is bounded on the north by East 10th Street, on the east by Avenue B, on the south by East 7th Street, and on the west by Avenue A. St. Mark's Place abuts the park to the west. Communist Rally, 1877. In July 1877, railroad workers received their second wage cut of the year by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. On July 14, railroad employees in Martinsburg, West Virginia, began what came to be known as the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. On July 25, 1877, 20,000 people gathered in Tompkins Square Park to hear communist orators speak about revolution, the strike, and the policies of President Hayes. All speeches were repeated in German at a second stand, as the neighborhood had such a large German population at that time. David Conroy, chairman of the Working Man's Organization in NYC and organizer of the rally, stated that the purpose of the meeting was to harmonize the differences between the strikers and the railroad companies, and to urge the citizen soldiery to refrain from acting against the strikers. Although the rally did not get out of hand, New York City Police and National Guardsmen eventually charged the crowd with billy clubs, later claiming that the rally was not being held in a peaceful manner. In the wake of this the city, in conjunction with the War Department, established an official city armory program led by the 7th Regiment. Police riot, 1988. The Tompkins Square Park police riot was a defining moment for the neighborhood. In the late hours of August 6 into the morning hours of August 7, 1988, a riot broke out in Alphabet City's Tompkins Square Park. Groups of drug pushers, homeless people and young people known as skinheads had largely taken over the East Village Park, but the neighborhood was divided about what, if anything, should be done about it. The local governing body, Manhattan Community Board 3, adopted a 1 a.m. curfew for the previously 24-hour park, in an attempt to bring it under control. On July 31, a rally against the curfew resulted in several clashes between protesters and police. East River Park. The park is 57 acres and runs between the Franklin D. Roosevelt Drive and the East River from Montgomery Street to East 12th Street. It was designed in the 1930s by Robert Moses, who wanted to ensure there was parkland on the Lower East Side. In 2010, construction was completed on the East River Promenade, which now runs from East 12th Street to Grand Street and continues to be expanded south. Community gardens. There are reportedly over 640 community gardens in New York City. Gardens run by local collectives within the neighborhood who are responsible for the garden's upkeep. And an estimated 10% of those are located on the Lower East Side and East Village alone. Tower of Toys on Avenue B. The Avenue B and 6th Street Community Garden is one of the neighborhood's more notable for a now-removed outdoor sculpture, the Tower of Toys, designed by artist and longtime garden gatekeeper Eddie Bowers. Bowers died April 27, 2007. The tower was controversial in the neighborhood. Some viewed it as a masterpiece, others as an eyesore. It was a makeshift structure, 65 feet high, assembled of wooden planks. The toys suspended from it were an amalgamation of fanciful objects found on the street. The fantastical, childlike feeling of this installation was fitting, considering that the garden boasts a Childrena Euro unregistered trademark S-Adventure playground and garden. The tower appeared in the opening credits for the television show NYPD Blue and also appears in the musical Rent. In May 2008, it was dismantled. According to NYC Parks Commissioner Adrian Bennett, the tower was rotting and thus a safety hazard. Its removal was seen by some as a symbol of the neighborhood's fading past. Toyota Children's Learning Garden, located at 603 East 11th Street, the Toyota Children's Learning Garden is not technically a community garden, but it also fails to fit in the park category. Designed by landscape architect Michael van Valkenburg, the garden opened in May 2008 as part of the New York Restoration Project and is designed to teach children about plants. La Plaza Cultural. La Plaza Cultural de Armando Perez is a community garden, open-air theater and green space in the East Village, Marble Cemeteries, the New York City Marble Cemetery, located on 2nd Street between 1st Avenue and 2nd Avenue, is the second oldest non-sectarian cemetery in New York City. The cemetery opened in 1831. U.S. President James Monroe was interred there. Others interred there include Stephen Allen, Mayor. James Lennox, whose personal library became part of the New York Public Library. Isaac Varian, Mayor. Marinus Willett, Revolutionary War hero. And Preserved Fish, a well-known merchant. Nearby, on 2nd Avenue between 2nd and 3rd Streets, is the oldest public cemetery in New York City not affiliated with any religion, the similarly named New York Marble Cemetery. It is open the 4th Sunday of every month. Culture, ethnicity and religion. According to 2000 census figures provided by the New York City Department of City Planning, which includes the Lower East Side in its calculation, the neighborhood was 35% Asian, 28% non-Hispanic white, 27% Hispanic and 7% black. On October 9, 1966, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, held the first recorded outdoor chanting session of the Hare Krishna mantra outside of the Indian subcontinent at Tompkins Square Park. This is considered the founding of the Hare Krishna religion in the United States, and the large tree close to the center of the park is demarcated as a special religious site for Krishna adherents. The late poet Allen Ginsberg, who lived and died in the East Village, attended the ceremony. Several Roman Catholic churches in the East Village have fallen victim to financial hardship in the last decade. Unable or unwilling to maintain them, the Roman Catholic Church has shuttered St. Mary's Help of Christians on East 12th Street, as well as St. Anne's. There has recently been much controversy over St. Bridget's, the historic parish on Tompkins Square Park. One of the mainstays that remains active is St. Stanislaus, just steps from Tompkins Square Park. Cultural institutions, neighborhood festivals. May Day Festival May 1st. Yearly. Charlie Parker Jazz Festival August. Yearly. Howl Festival Summer. Yearly. Dance Parade Summer. Yearly. Dream Up Festival August September. Yearly. East Village Radio Festival September 6, 2008. Tompkins Square Halloween Dog Parade October. Yearly. East Village Theatre Festival August 3 23, 2009. FAB. Festival and Block Party last weekend in September annually, September 25, 2010. Transportation, on subway, the nearest stations are 2nd Avenue, Astor Place, 8th Street New York University, and First Avenue. On bus, the nearest buses are M1, M2, M3, M8, M9, M14A, M14D, M15, M15 SBS, M21, M101, M102, A and M103. Media, notable residents. See also. References. External links: East Village Parks Conservancy, East Village Visitors Center, East Village TripAdvisor, Lower East Side Preservation Initiative.